British Columbia is headed to the polls October 19th. Why does this guy care, you might ask? Well, some of you might know I live in beautiful British Columbia. Anyways, the incumbent David Eby of the NDP is expected to be pushed all the way by surging BC Conservative John Rostad. As it stands, the BC Conservatives and the BC NDP are neck and neck with 338 Canada projecting 46 of the available 93 seats each way. Of course, the NDP currently has a majority government thanks to the immensely popular former Premier John Horgan. There is, of course, the small issue of Sonia Faustino of the BC Greens and the independents running in this election. With respect, Sonia Faustino is not expected to win this election. But later I'll tell you why her party and the independents could be pivotal for the governance of beautiful British Columbia going forward. There is, of course, a debate between the leaders on October 8th, just in time for the election. David Eby, John Rostad, and Sonia Faustino are expected to participate. But before we get into all that, here are some of the issues I expect to be top of mind in this election. Number one, addiction, and by extension, public safety. Number two, housing. Number three, carbon tax or climate action. Number four, affordability and government debt. I also have a sneaky feeling at number five here that SOGI 123 may become important in the coming days. SOGI, by the way, just means sexual orientation and gender identity. It is a program introduced by the now disappeared BC Liberals in 2016 as a way to foster an inclusive environment for LGBTQ students. However, its opponents say it basically turns your kids trans, so to speak. We'll get into that, but for now, let's talk about addiction. So at number one, with regards to addiction, David Eby has obviously moderated in recent times. Previously, his administration focused a lot on harm reduction with measures like safe consumption sites and plugging the toxic drug supply. You've got to remember, BC probably has the most hippie approach to drugs in the country. Yeah, bro. Recreational marijuana became legal in 2018, not under David Eby. And in 2023, BC basically decriminalized small amounts of cocaine, meth, and MDMA under David Eby. So it's no longer a criminal offense to possess these illicit drugs. However, even with these policies in place, the number of drug deaths in BC continues to rise year over year. And now there's probably an even bigger problem. It isn't uncommon to see a person injecting their drugs in a public park or just out in the streets. While you can empathize with a person struggling with addiction, we can all agree that most people in this province who do not have a drug problem would like the option of taking their kids for playtime in the park or something. There's also obviously the public safety aspect of things because a high person may be erratic. Anyways, I did mention David Eby has moderated his drug policies a little bit. In April, he announced the recriminalization of drug use in public spaces. Anyways, the Conservatives have blamed the NDP and its policies for BC's worsening drug problem. John Rostad plans to shut down safe consumption sites and champion solutions like involuntary treatment. Now, we can debate the pros and cons of the idea of involuntary treatment, but then you wouldn't hear about number two, would you? At number two, I think an issue that is top of mind even at the federal level, but certainly here in BC, is housing, right? There's obviously no secret at this point that if you're 17 to 54 and don't own a home right now, you may never be able to buy a house in Canada. Also, I think most people might agree that the housing crisis has become significantly worse, mostly after COVID lockdowns, because of the federal policy on immigration. According to Statistics Canada, roughly 800,000 non-permanent residents were added to Canada's population in 2023 alone. As an immigrant myself, I'm not against immigration, okay? I'm not against immigration. But I think we can all agree that bringing that many people into the country in such a short period of time puts a lot of pressure on housing and other services, of course. Most people might not recall this in the light of recent events, but we already had an unaffordable housing problem before COVID lockdowns. Of course, now we blame immigration for the unaffordability of housing. However, back then we actually considered other factors like overseas money launderers essentially pricing people out of the market. There was also the not minor problem of short-term rentals affecting the supply of housing. Anyways, David Eby has recently announced on the campaign trail his intention to fast-track prefabricated homes to ease BC's housing crisis. So prefabricated homes are essentially factory-built homes. That's added to restrictions placed on short-term rentals and his agreement with the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations about 2 weeks ago, which would see 2,600 affordable homes partially subsidized by the government at 60% of their market value. John Rostad is obviously of the opinion that the government should just get out of the way and let the private sector do the business. His conservatives have promised that they will cut the bureaucratic red tape around housing development permits. He has also criticized the NDP for increasing construction costs by 30 to 40%, allegedly, due to the net zero building requirements that they place on builders. And he plans to repeal those net zero requirements. And we all know John Rostad believes climate change is not an emergency.
Is climate change a problem?
Climate change is an issue. There's no question it's an issue. But we have to put that in the context of making sure that people can afford to live in British Columbia, that people can afford to raise a family here, that they can build a future here.
Is climate change human caused?
There's no question that human is having an impact on it. There's no question in terms of that. And so
okay, because that is antithetical to what you had boosted back in 2020. You are moderating your position then.
No, I haven't changed my position at all. You can go back and look at the clips from back then. I've said exactly the same thing. The issue here is that people are struggling, and we need a government that's going to focus on trying to make sure that they can have a good quality of life here in British Columbia.
So let's talk about that now. At number 3, the third issue I believe will be top of mind in this particular election is the carbon tax and climate change. I've got to be honest. At the moment, I'm not sure if John Rostad truly doesn't believe in climate change. Obviously, the NDP would like you to believe he doesn't. He has clarified his position in recent times by saying he does believe in climate change, but not necessarily the fact that it is human caused or that we should be doing anything about it. In fact, he has said he would rather focus on other aspects of life like affordability and housing for British Columbians. My honest opinion, that is a shit plan. But regardless, as an umbrella, the Conservatives up to the federal level have said they do not believe the carbon tax is the best policy to influence climate change. It doesn't stop any floods. It doesn't stop any wildfires. You've heard that talk before, right? But let's not get too far into that. People believe at the moment that we're currently being taxed into oblivion, and the carbon tax has been hugely unpopular despite the best efforts of the NDP and the federal Liberals. And 2 weeks ago, David Eby announced that BC would be willing to scrap the carbon tax if the federal Liberals and Justin Trudeau remove the requirement to collect it. I don't know. Some might call that passing the buck. But let's move on, shall we? At number 4, the fourth big issue I expect to be top of mind in this election is government debt and the affordability crisis. Affordability is another one of those problems that is Canada-wide. It will definitely feature heavily in the federal election when it happens. So post-COVID lockdowns, inflation obviously had a whole run up and wages clearly didn't keep up, hence the affordability issues. That has obviously not been good for incumbents. Insert Justin Trudeau in this equation, you'll see what I mean. It is probably the biggest reason why Justin Trudeau is currently projected to lose by a landslide on the federal stage. It remains to be seen how that will shape up for David Eby and the NDP. The BC Conservatives have also highlighted the ballooning government debt. They say the debt is an indication of the current BC NDP government's blatant mismanagement. The BC government debt was up 122% in the 2023-24 fiscal year compared to 2007-2008. In fact, only Alberta had a higher increase in debt in the same period of time. But to be fair, when you scale to GDP, so net debt to GDP, you'll see that BC is actually doing much better than Alberta or Manitoba or even Ontario compared to 2007-2008 debt levels. So short and sweet, that's just mostly what I had to say about that. But let's talk about making your kids trans, shall we? But number 5, the 5th issue I expect to be top of mind in this particular BC election is SOGI 123. SOGI is sexual orientation and gender identity, as I told you before. It is a tool introduced to the K-12 curriculum to help create an inclusive environment free of bullying for LGBTQ students. And that was all well and good. Hey, you're going to teach kids to not be mean to each other and to understand that there's people with different expressions of self compared to them. There's nothing wrong with that, right? That is until you come home and realize your 5-year-old is being shown pictures of gay couples having sex or being told they can be a boy despite being assigned female at birth. As they grow older, if they choose to change their pronouns in school and your baby girl now goes by he, him in school, well, the teachers are not allowed to out them to their parents. Sadly, a lot of parents didn't like this very much. And some of these parents might take that out on a politician that is perceived to be promoting that. Anyways, we can do a whole deep dive on SOGI education in a different episode. You can tell me what you think about it in the chat, actually. But there is a big debate there. Long story short, David Eby has publicly supported SOGI. Now, why wouldn't he? Trans kids, for example, are 5 times more likely to commit suicide, right? And this is just a way of creating an environment that supports them. John Rostad, on the other hand, has obviously spoken against the perceived indoctrination and over-sexualization of children by SOGI. He has previously compared SOGI school curriculum to indigenous residential schools. Okay, so those are the 5 issues I expect to be top of mind as we race towards October 19th. While it is almost certain that either David Eby or John Rostad will form the next BC government, it is possible that whoever wins will only have a minority government. So there is a subplot to watch for in this election. Obviously, if you've just joined the action, you've missed the spectacular collapse of BC United, formerly the BC Liberals. Their leader, Kevin Falcon, chose to join forces with the Conservatives in a bid to unite the right. Some BC United MLAs like Ian Payton and Peter Milobar will be contesting under the BC Conservative banner. However, Mark Bernier and Tom Schipeka are notable BC United MLAs who decided not to join the Conservatives, so they will contest as independents. There's also obviously the small issue of Sonia Faustino and the BC Greens. So it will be interesting to see how things shape up. The debate on October 8th might help some people who are still on the fence to choose a side come election day. So, why don't you guys let me know in the chat? What is important to you in this election? And how is your candidate of choice going to address it? And if you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe down below. I'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.